Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that seeks to tell you first thing everything that's coming up in the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
Good morning. It is Monday, the 23rd of September. My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me is Sam Coates of Sky News. And Sam, you are in Liverpool at the Labour Party conference, the thing that is going to dominate our coverage this morning and indeed for the whole of the early part of this week. I'm still in London. I'll be heading up there shortly, which means I'm probably feeling a little bit better than you, Sam. Just tell me how it went last night.
Well, Jack, this is, of course, a podcast of service to the British people. So we were out quite late last night. Labour has descended on Liverpool, and there is the usual parade of dinners and drinks parties and all of that. I went to the one in an incredibly cool bar, far cooler than me, Salt Dog Slims, held by ex-Labour advisor James Robinson for Woburn Partners, a sort of Liverpool dive bar. But even at that event, you know, it was quite telling about the mood. I went to the same event last year. This year doesn't quite have the exuberance that we saw before the election, and we'll come on and talk to you about why. But here we have Labour in government for the first time in 14 years. A lot of people watching themselves. There was one cabinet minister I saw where the consensus was that drink had been taken, but most were much more cautious than that. And just sort of nervous, I think, was the mood. Only Wes Streeting kind of broke through. He went to the New Statesman party and let rip at some of the coverage. It's going to get worse, he said. Sue Gray has been hiding Lord Lucan. She shot JFK. I don't know how we're going to recover from this, frankly. He comes out swinging. Not many other members of the cabinet, sober or otherwise, seem to quite. That's one of the fascinating things here in Liverpool. Anyway, what are we talking about today?
I mean, we're going to be talking about Labour. We will not really be talking about the German election results. There were regional elections last night, and if Olaf Scholz's party had done really badly, there was a lot of speculation that he might be out. He is, of course, tanking in the polls at the moment, but he did better than expected. They got ahead of the far right, so he will cling on for at least another day, although whether he makes it through for another whole year to the German elections remains to be seen. Other stuff kicking around today is Afghan public inquiry, where Ben Wallace is speaking. But honestly, Sam, I think we should focus on one thing, and that is Labour, Labour, Labour. It is Rachel Reeves' day today. The Chancellor will be speaking at noon, trying to cast a little bit more optimism into the scene after weeks of gloom. And there's this possibility of this vote happening on winter fuel as well at conference. Now, according to my Playbook colleague Dan Bloom, the expectation is that won't happen today, but at some point this week, or in the early part of this week, there's going to be a vote, a non-binding vote, we should stress, on Labour's winter fuel allowance cuts, which might be rather embarrassing for the government, although not something that's actually going to change policy.
And before you get into the main bit of this podcast, just to remind you, we want to hear from you. We want you to shout about this podcast. Please, please, please share it on social media. Leave a review. Click those stars, subscribe, generally make a noise about it. It could be quiet out there. So we want you to tell us what you think. And by the way, it is actually lovely to meet some fans of it here in Liverpool, even if they approach you in the toilet.
Oh, my goodness. I'm not sure I'm looking forward to that at all. As on a Monday morning, what we try and do is just quickly whiz you through all the things that are coming up this week so that your head is in gear for the week ahead before we get into what is happening today on Monday. So, Sam, just very quickly talk us through the day up in conference where you are.
There's a whole load of mostly 5-minute speeches from cabinet ministers, from John Healey, who's going to appeal to video gamers to come and join the MOD, Business Secretary, Chancellors at midday, Lou Haig, the Transport Secretary, concluding with Ed Miliband at just before 3:30, and so lots of speeches. You've got Ben Wallace down at the Afghan public inquiry down in London. He made changes to a bill that would have protected soldiers from war crimes for 5 years rather than 10 years. Why did he do that? And you've got the next phase of the Post Office inquiry.
Yeah, Tuesday is day 3 of Labour conference, and Keir Starmer will be speaking on Tuesday, so that will be the big sort of centrepiece moment of the conference, and we'll obviously be talking about that tomorrow. And in parallel, over in New York, the annual UN General Assembly debate opens, which means world leaders are all heading for New York City, and indeed we're expecting Keir Starmer to be heading there on Tuesday night after he's given his speech.
That means that on Wednesday, Keir Starmer will be doing the round of conference sit-down interviews with the broadcast media out in New York. It's unusual. I don't think this ever happened before. He's not speaking to the media for the most part while he's in Liverpool. Instead, he'll talk to the travelling pack while he's out there. Meanwhile, in London, Graham Brady launches his book with all of those details of what was really going on with those letters of no confidence throughout the Tory years.
I think that book looks really good. I've really enjoyed the extracts from it. I never, ever read political books because the very idea makes me feel queasy, but I think I might actually have a scan through Graham Brady's book because it looks like really good fun. By Thursday, Labour conference is over, and we're sort of in that lull period between Labour and Tory conferences, and all eyes will very much be on America. All the leaders are still out there at the UN. Joe Biden is supposed to be meeting Vladimir Zelensky on Thursday at the White House, and Zelensky is also thought to be meeting up with Donald Trump at some point at the back end of this week. Whether Keir Starmer, who's in New York, also manages to meet up with Donald Trump, and indeed Kamala Harris, remains to be seen, but I'm sure he would like to do that if he can while he's over there. So that'll be the other thing we're watching for at the back end of this week.
And Saturday, Sunday is the Tory Party conference in Birmingham. Let's get on with Liverpool and Labour Party conference. What's the big thing today, Jack?
The big thing today is Rachel Reeves. She has been embarking on a broadcast round this morning ahead of her conference speech at noon. She will speak for about 20 minutes or something like that, and she will try to project a little bit more of an optimistic note than we have heard from the Labour leadership during their first 2 or 3 months in power. It's pretty obvious, Sam, that they are listening to some of the criticism that they are getting now, albeit some would say belatedly. There has been a sort of chorus of complaints from some Labour MPs and some Labour aides and indeed some Whitehall officials and indeed some economists that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, the tone they have set so far has been a little bit too gloomy, and that is damaging Labour's standing in the polls. It is ruining Labour's should have been a honeymoon with the public, and maybe even causing economic problems for the country, according to Andy Haldane, the former Bank of England guy, just the other day. And therefore we get the briefings for Rachel Reeves' speech dropped overnight into today, and they are all very much about there is a prize on offer in the future. We are, the sort of sunlit uplands are there in the distance. We just have to get through this difficult bit over the next few weeks and months and maybe year or so, and then don't worry, everything's going to be more wonderful in this country. Are people going to buy it, Sam? I don't know, but that's the message that Rachel Reeves and her team want to project today.
There is no doubt that today marks a big rhetorical handbrake turn. Rachel Reeves talking about how she's never been more optimistic about our country's fortunes and talking about the country's potential, and that, as you were saying, that she can see the prize on offer. I'm not sure everybody else in Liverpool can quite yet. I suppose the first big challenge for this speech is rhetoric enough? Because for sure we are having a different type of language all of a sudden being talked about in relation to the economy. But the essential pattern of what she's saying remains the same. There need to be difficult decisions now, including more difficult decisions in the October 30th budget, and they are doing this in order to give themselves some space, give themselves the ability to effectively spend a bit more in the future. But that always was the framework. It always was the argument. We focused on the gloomy language when she first sort of came up with this framework and this argument back just before the summer when she was doing her statement where she cut winter fuel allowance. And there's no doubt there's a fair bit of language in here that we haven't heard before. She talks about how there will be no return to austerity, but she doesn't define austerity. But she says you need investment and growth. The question is how much and where is it going to come from? But without really having any, policy or target or specific, the question is, will this really make a difference? What does a hopeful future look like if there's no flesh on the bones?
Yeah, and you have to bear in mind how much are the public really paying attention ever to Rachel Reeves' conference speech on a Monday lunchtime in Liverpool. If there isn't some big shiny policy announcement to go with it, then, language is only ever going to get you so far. Other thing to flag about Rachel Reeves today is that she's not just speaking to the media and indeed the party faithful. This is also a day for Rachel Reeves to connect with business. It is Labour's Business Day, and that's a big deal for this Labour Party. They're very, very keen to keep business on side, having in their mind sort of one big business over to the cause, following painstaking work over the last couple of years. They need to maintain that, and so something like 500 CEOs and big cheeses from businesses will be filing into some enormous conference centre room, and they've paid £3,000 each a head for the privilege of doing so, where they will get to hang out in private with Rachel Reeves and Johnny Reynolds, the business secretary, and other significant Labour people. And that sort of glad handing and private messaging senior business is a very important part of their day. And actually, interestingly, Sam, Rachel Reeves, I think, again, according to Playbook, is going to be introduced today by Alex DePledge, who's a tech entrepreneur, a female tech entrepreneur, more to the point, which gives you an indication of the kind of image that Rachel Reeves wants to project today. Pro-business, of course, wants to emphasise the fact that she's the first female chancellor as well, and she's dragged herself up through the Treasury glass ceiling. And all of that is part of the messaging today, as well as this optimistic, or attempting to be optimistic message to the public.
Here is why I think today really matters for Rachel Reeves. Because something has changed. Something has changed in the 80-odd days since Labour came into power. Before the summer, it was a given, I think, in Labour circles that Rachel Reeves was trusted with the politics of the economy. She was lauded as somebody who worked incredibly closely with Keir Starmer, and in some cases, in some kind of the storytelling, was actually the more political one of the two. But then she did the 22 billion black hole, the winter fuel allowance, which has caused raw pain across the Labour Party and is still the subject, still the discussions in the dive bars of Liverpool last night. And there is now a question about whether or not she really is as good at politics, as good at strategy as she was presented as being by the Labour Party. So the job of her speech today is less about the country and more about reassuring the MPs, the activists, who have been unnerved by what they've seen in the opening phase of this government. And she's got to get back their trust, because I tell you, in Liverpool, it's taken a dent.
And you mentioned the winter fuel allowance. We should say that there is likely to be this vote. I don't think today, but certainly this week, and it might yet be today. We haven't seen the conference papers, and the way that just people who don't go to Labour Party conference, first of all, you're very fortunate. Second of all, it's really complicated the way these things work. They have these sort of private committees that sit down in the middle of the night and argue about what's going to be debated tomorrow, and these sort of details emerge early in the morning. But one of the unions, Unite, the most sort of powerful left-wing union, has put forward this motion essentially condemning Rachel Reeves' cuts to winter fuel allowance, and they had a big meeting last night about whether that vote would happen in the form Unite wants it to. We are told it is going to, and the expectation is that the Labour leadership will lose that vote. Now, the vote means nothing at all in terms of changing Labour Party policy, but you will have this spectacle potentially at some point this week where delegates at the conference will get to vote on this totemic policy, and they will probably vote against it. Now, the Labour leadership will still go off and do it, but it's obviously not a good look for a party that's 2 or 3 months into power for the party membership and the delegates at the conference to stand up and condemn this flagship policy. And that's exactly not the message that the Labour leadership want to be projecting to the country right now.
The agonies around the winter fuel allowance decision are real, and the reasons for that are clear. It causes a huge cliff edge for certain pensioners. It means that there will be more pensioners who are below the poverty line. But moreover, people in Liverpool are scratching their heads and asking why. Because Rachel Reeves said she had to do it because it raised money. Not a huge amount of money. It's over £1 billion of the £22 billion black hole, but never raised money. But it's not clear that it does. Because at the same time, the government is trying to get everyone who qualifies to sign up for pension credit. And if they do that, there won't be any savings from this policy. And the question then is, well, if it isn't about the money, what is it about? What is it about? And I was talking to one MP late last night who told me that when she questioned Rachel Reeves in private, Rachel said, well, the reason for doing winter fuel allowance is because they've got to set the narrative about the state of the economy, like the Tories did to Labour in 2010. But if it's about setting the narrative, isn't this unnecessary political pain? And I think whether that's a fair or not characterisation of that conversation, it's very hard to judge. But just why are they doing that? And a sense that the party wasn't prepared for all the questions it would face at the point at which it announced it, and then left a vacuum over the summer for this subject to be endlessly discussed, is now one of the bruises that you're seeing here in Liverpool.
Yeah, and speaking of bruises at Liverpool, this whole sort of row that we've seen over the last week coming out into public about how senior Labour figures have been conducting themselves, and the sort of dysfunction in Number 10 continues to rumble on, and the Sunday papers were pretty brutal for people working in Downing Street. If you took the trouble to read them yesterday, you would have seen all sorts of further briefings against Sue Gray, Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, and just more broadly about the way that Downing Street operates. And Sam, we talked a lot about this on Thursday. I have had people saying to me, this is all confected media nonsense. You're just looking for ways to attack a new Labour government. They're, looking for tiny scraps because you're trying to make this out to be a bigger thing than it really is. Just to be clear, this is not media confected nonsense, unless you think that significant numbers of people who work inside government or work very closely to Keir Starmer's team are all collectively making this up when they're quietly telling journalists just how bad it is inside Number 10. And I think what I find strange about today, Sam, is that if I, heaven forbid, if I was running a comms operation inside Downing Street and I had a week of headlines this bad and the story, the narrative just running about how dysfunctional Downing Street is, I'd have done something about it. Like, the great thing about being in government is you can change that narrative by announcing a big thing. You can do stuff. It's not like in opposition where you can't change anything. You can announce a big policy. Surely they've got lots of big policies to announce. We haven't seen anything like that. Over the weekend they announced almost nothing. There was quite an interesting planning tweak in the Observer that could, significantly change how we build houses. But it was pretty techie. It's not going to, set hairs running and get everyone talking about it. And there's been no attempt, it seems to me, to seize back control of the narrative and just kill this story about free suits and free frocks and spectacles, or indeed this story about the Chief of Staff running the country in a dysfunctional way at all. And so it's just been allowed to fester, and people are just going to keep talking about it. And that seems to me a pretty fundamental failure of the government so far. And, there's nothing that we've seen from Rachel Reeves' speech today that's going to change that either.
No, the mood is bluntly at times pretty grumpy here, because people can sense that they're not winning, certainly the public conversation battle, partly because it doesn't feel like they've been trying. I mean, as you say, some of the announcements yesterday were merely tweaks on Tory policies that Jeremy Hunt announced just months ago, the investment zones in particular. And so the vacuum has been filled with these stories about freebies where nobody seemed to be able to agree a line. Bridget Phillipson turned up on Sky yesterday morning and said, look, it's fine to accept Wahid Ali freebies because they're all connected with work. Angela Rayner said, look, it's fine to accept Wahid Ali freebies because they're not connected with work. There is no single story here that they can agree on. But it's because there's a vacuum. And you've got this bizarre spectacle of the Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, actually staying away from conference, even though she's meant to be a political figure, supposedly to prepare for the UN summit, while Wahid Ali, a colleague was telling me, is staying in the main conference hotel, but just trying to avoid coming out beyond popping down to the lobby because he knows he's the subject of all of these briefings and stories. The thing about Liverpool this year is that there are so many people with different diagnoses of the problem, whether it's Sue Gray herself, whether it's just the comms department in Downing Street, whether it's Vidya, the political secretary who doesn't engage with MPs, just with stakeholders, whether it's Simon Case, whether it's the Prime Minister not knowing his own mind and the direction of the country. There's a lot of worry, there's a lot of criticism. There's 2 days, really, for the Labour leadership to show that they can grip this and draw a line under what has not actually been that pleasant and certainly not that celebratory an experience.
Well, I can't wait to get up there. You've really sold it to me, Sam. I'm going to get off this podcast and go and get on a train. So I will see you in the bar, in the Pullman, in a few hours. Have a lovely morning, everyone. Thanks very much for listening.
See you then.